Welcome, Heather. Heather Suzanne Woods is a scholar, communication and technology expert, and an emerging tech strategist. She has been researching the relationship between technology and culture for over a decade. Dr. Woods' research on emerging tech provides crucial and actionable insights for scholars, industry, nonprofits, advocacy organizations, and the public. Heather has written 2 books on technology and culture. The first explained how meme culture influenced political communication ahead of the 2016 US presidential election. And the second book on smart homes is forthcoming in June of this year from the University of Alabama Press. Heather's work is published widely in the academic and popular culture context. Her research has been featured in Wired, the New York Times, Atlantic, CBC's Spark, the Washington Post, the LA Times, and more. She is a K. Patricia Cross Future Leaders Award recipient, a Hearst Leadership Institute alumna, and a senior advisor for the Women's March. So the floor is yours. Heather, you're welcome. You can
Thanks so
speaking.
much. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. Can I get confirmation you can see a slide deck?
We see you.
Great. Okay, here we go. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are, whether you're listening to this live in person or as part of a stream, or even if you're watching this later. Thanks so much for that lovely introduction and for the invitation to be here with you today. My name is Heather Suzanne Woods, and I'm speaking to you today from my office at Kansas State University in Manhattan, Kansas, USA. It is 7 in the morning here, so you might see the light change behind me. I mentioned the place from which I'm speaking, not only because it's customary for me to do so in talks like this, but because part of my talk today is about how emerging or existing technologies change the way that we live, in part by helping to orient ourselves to time and to space. So by pointing out our shared presence, likely across geographical distance and perhaps across time, if you're watching later, I'm pointing out how our technical and technological mediation creates new conditions for living at home, at work, alone, and with others. So the title of my talk today refers to this condition of perpetual mediation. I call it living in digitality. In short, it means that humans have created conditions under which, if we choose, we can have every moment of every day mediated by emerging technologies. This might sound like alchemy or, I don't know, a fiction that's cinematic in nature, but as I hope to demonstrate today, this ubiquitous mediation, characterized as living in digitality, can also express in sort of banal, hidden, domestic sort of ways. In the talk that I've prepared for you today, start at the very beginning. In the talk that I've prepared for you today, I intend to focus on shifting technological and cultural terrains in the context of the smart home. Now, the smart home, put simply, are domestic spaces that are outfitted with connected technologies, networks, devices. And while the smart home has many different types of expressions, what ties all of them together is an experience of living with technology at every moment or nearly every moment of every day. More than that, we will examine how ubiquitous technologies mobilize existing cultural ideologies of progress and optimization and develop new ones to help modify our relationship with time and space within the domestic sphere and outside of it. We will discuss how smart homes represent living in digitality as the becoming environmental of digital technologies. This talk is a bit of a sneak preview of my forthcoming book that's called Threshold from the University of Alabama Press. In the book and in this talk, I make the argument about smart homes as an expression of the modern technological condition, but also as central to a burgeoning domestic and social imaginary for what life at home can and should be like. More particularly, I'll argue that smart homes are reconfiguring the collective meaning of home through machinic and platform logics that emphasize, for instance, digital capture over collective care, technological proliferation over equity, and optimization over shared abundance. Now, this talk focuses on smart homes for a number of reasons as an object of investigation and inquiry. Perhaps first, for me, the home is an important site of politics, but for various reasons that I'll speak about, but also I imagine we could get into in a Q&A if you were interested. The home as a site of politics is often overlooked. And so that makes it an interesting object of inquiry for me in terms of space and technology. Second, the home has frequently been the site of domestic and technological experimentation, from the hearth to indoor plumbing to new rooms in smart homes that are made to receive deliveries made by contingent workers. The domestic space matters for technological experimentation, including AI and automated technologies. Third, what happens inside the home influences what happens outside of the home. Economics, politics, the cultural sphere, in ways that are both predictable and also not so predictable. And so smart homes are a useful object of analysis because they represent one point of arrival in a long lineage of domestic technologies, moving us towards ubiquitous environmental tech, materially, physically, but also in terms of our imaginary and collective discourse about home. A brief note about my approach. I am a communication scholar by training, with an emphasis on media theory, rhetoric, and power. So you'll see that framework stitched throughout my talk today as I discuss the relationship between emergent technology, domesticity, and so forth. Communication is inherently an interdisciplinary field, so I borrow frameworks from colleagues in other fields, including collective placemaking, for instance. For this book, I engaged in about 6 years of fieldwork in smart homes across the United States. In the context of the United States, I toured a number of smart homes across the nation. I also, much to my domestic partners' chagrin, embedded domestic technology, smart technologies in my own home, making my mid-century home smart again. And I also attended a number of industry conferences for people developing, marketing, and testing smart technologies. So all of my comments today come from that theoretical and methodological perspective. One of the arguments that I make in the book is that digital technologies are increasingly environmental. And I mean that in the sense of the environment in which we live. From a material or a physical perspective, they are networked, they are interconnected, they are reliant upon one another, but also in a discursive sense, meaning that we exist in a world of our own imagination, sort of a headspace, a worldview, a framework for living And so smart homes are often connected to cultural infrastructures inside the home, things like the American domestic ideal, or the idea of the nuclear family, or the neo-nuclear family, but also connected to technological and built infrastructures outside the home. So for instance, many smart homes purport to decrease the use of natural resources. They might connect to, for instance, an electric grid or public utilities. That's an example of how the smart home is increasingly environmental, because it happens to connect the inside and the outside, interiority with exteriority. From my perspective, then, technology is not just a neutral tool to be picked up and put down, opted into, or opted out of, but it's increasingly shaping our society and spaces. And as a result, it is now difficult to be outside of digitality. And so one of the conclusions I make in the book and in this talk is that our frameworks for opting in or opting out, our perspectives on agency, become increasingly complicated when technology becomes networked, when we don't always or immediately consent, for instance, to engaging in smart technology. If, for instance, our neighbors or our workplaces or our places of worship, or wherever our various second and third spaces, where if they engage in smart technologies, they're creating a network, and part of a network that is enmeshed in that we're enmeshed in on a daily basis. So to account for this condition of omnipresent, nearly omnipotent technologies, I developed the term living in digitality. Now, when I was thinking through this concept, I spent a lot of time on the preposition in. For a while, I thought, maybe we're living with technology and digitality. Maybe we're living through it. But really, I wanted to demonstrate the encapsulation of human experience in a web of technological relation of our own building, some of which we choose, some of which we don't, and some of which we choose if we are privileged digital subjects, and some of which is sort of put onto us if we are less privileged digital subjects. It has several key features, all of which are interconnected, but I want to focus on two anchoring features today, which include optimization and computability, or computation. When I give talks about the smart home, people oftentimes tell me, or ask me, what holds the different manifestations of the smart home together? And these frameworks of optimization and computation are really the frameworks that help not only people understand the utility of connected technologies, but help to build a future imaginary for domestic space and non-domestic space that's based in optimization. So optimization as a principle is really about taking that which is not optimal and making it optimal. It becomes a perpetual project of perfection, managing and perfecting that which is oftentimes messy, which has an excess, or which doesn't always necessarily lead itself to computation, and making it a perfect version of itself. Because it is based in efficiency and management, it becomes a perpetual project in and of itself. So optimization is both the goal of living in digitality, but it's also the framework or methodology by which living in digitality occurs. We can continually optimize over and over and over and over and over again until we get close to perfect. Okay, perfection, optimization necessarily assumes a value. What are we heading towards? What are we heading away from? In the context of the present in the smart home, living in digitality is about logistics and quantifying and qualifying the value of everyday life. Now, for some people, for privileged digital subjects, this might express as ease or leisure or joy or fun or pleasure. For less privileged digital subjects, it means that their experience might be so meticulously managed that the very parts of humanity that make us run get sort of cut out or minimized or managed. An example of this, for instance, is a smart home that is delivered or that has goods delivered through contingent laborers, like for instance, Amazon delivery drivers who have their routes so meticulously managed by algorithms in order to decrease the time or to increase efficiency, that they aren't able to, for instance, use the bathroom. And so they have to urinate in their trucks because they have been managed, they have been optimized to the benefit of certain digital privileged subjects, but certainly not to them. If optimization is the framework and the pathway towards living in digitality, computation is the metaphor and sort of imaginary for what digitality can look like. And of course, I mean computation here as the things that are surrounding me, the things that I am using to talk to you all at a distance, maybe the thing that you're watching me on later. But it's also an idealized metaphor. Space becomes computational. If you've ever heard the phrase work smarter, not harder, that's an example of taking computational principles, including of efficiency and optimization, and organizing them into space. So the computer becomes the framework for value and importance, and it also becomes the organizing principle for space. And it shapes space in interesting ways. So as we focus on computation as not just like a physical metaphor, but as a structural, discursive, or ideological one, life has to be made ready for computation because there are parts of life that are not inherently computational. And so the machinic logic becomes the North Star for not only developing a smart space, but also for developing a social sphere that's defined as computer, and the messy remainder of human life is modified or altered through those machinic logics. Now, when I give talks, I'm also often asked how we arrived at the smart home. The short answer is that it's somewhat of an inevitable result of several social, economic, and cultural conditions in which technological development and capitalism are intimately connected. And there's a long technological history of the smart home as a way to optimize space in line with computational principles. I'm going to move pretty quickly through this, but I'm happy to talk about it more in Q&A if people are interested. But what I want you to get out of these next few slides is that the attempt to perfect and optimize through computational, digital, or automated technologies is not new. Keck's House of Tomorrow was an experimental space that brought into consideration, for instance, remote technology that is in many ways de rigueur today. But it also created a space to demonstrate how the domestic sphere was a site to flex the proverbial muscle of domestic life. And this is an example of how, developing new materials and modern conveniences not only represented quality in terms of production or innovation in terms of production of the home, but also created scalability of comfort and technology in ways that sort of will reverberate into the smart home of today. You might have heard about the Monsanto House of the Future, or you might know of the company Monsanto. They did a bit of a pivot with their plastics around the middle of the century and made this sort of like bean-shaped, spade-shaped pod on the left that was an attempt to be experimental with production. And the idea was, at least in theory, these technologies would make comfort scalable and easier to architect solutions out of plastic, for instance. The reality was that it was sort of difficult to produce, difficult to scale, and it only really ended up in Disneyland, which is a sort of theme park in the United States, as a way to think about the future as opposed to really sort of shaking up their architectural space. So around the middle century, smart homes were pretty closely linked to discourses, for instance, about war, or about the space race. And they were attempts to unsettle maybe straight line architecture or to reconsider what domestic life could be. By the 1980s in the United States, the smart home became a marketing phrase or a marketing campaign and a way to really condense down individual comfort and technology into discrete, hermetically sealed packages of the space of the home itself. The smart home in this era was really a response to the experimental imaginaries and movements and protests of the middle century in the United States. There was largely some experimentation, but it was really about domesticating technology instead of using technology to push the package or framework forward. Now I would say that we're sort of in the present or the emerging element of the smart home. And we're going a little fast, let me go back. Which some people have called the Roaring 20s. And it's really about taking sort of cheap individual products and making a network that is interconnected and turning homes that maybe were not smart from the start into smart homes through piecemeal approaches. The platform becomes increasingly popular as an intermediary that connects all of the technologies together, but also as a way to justify the purchasing of, for instance, more technologies. So briefly, this is related to some of the field work that I did. This Brookfield residential smart home, it might not read as a smart home to you from the front. It didn't to me necessarily. And because I think the brains of the smart home are sort of hidden, they had to make little notes around the house, like the smart home drone landing pad for Amazon or other deliveries. This was also the house that had a drop zone, which created a hermetically sealed and highly surveilled space for domestic workers and contingent laborers who were delivering packages. And the idea was that the homeowner would never have to interact with the people delivering the goods to them. And this is an example of that, castle principle of homes in the United States, that it becomes a fortress and a space to protect against all manner of threats, including ones that the homeowner invites in as part of contingent labor. Now, there are experimental versions of this. On the left, you'll see the Duke University Smart Home that was sponsored by Home Depot. This is a dormitory at Duke University where college students are trying to architect sustainable solutions for the future. On the right is the Imagine Colorado Charles Family Smart Home. This is a group home for people with disabilities where they use smart technology to make life maybe easier or more seamless. But even in these experimental versions of living laboratory smart homes, it's hard to slip the grip of the discourse of optimization and of efficiency and of computation. And so it became hard for them to tell the story of the smart home when, it's not always the most efficient thing to do necessarily to architect a sustainable solution, but it will be in the long run. Human dignity might not always be computationally easy to quantify, but it's of incredible importance. And so even these experimental iterations of the smart home are sort of pulled into the cultural narrative of efficiency. And
Hello, Heather. Sorry, we are very short in time now. So if you could please kindly wrap up and then take just a couple of questions. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do it. I'm going to skip these next two slides because you've seen them already. But I do want to say that compounding crises like the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to continue to change how we consider the smart home, including accelerated adoption. If you're interested in this, my colleague Sophia Malson wrote a really interesting article about it. But just know that we are, rather than maybe thinking thoughtfully and slowly about smart home futures, seem to be engaging in acceleration given various crises. So I really appreciate your time and energy today. Thanks for being here. Thanks to the organizers for the invitation. And I'm now happy to answer questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Heather. So yes, we have some questions.
Yeah, I can start, and then we can take some questions from the audience if you have any. So I'm thinking, did you have the time to see the previous talk given by Peter and Mats?
Alas, I did not. I'm hoping to watch it after.
Well, I can. So they were kind of. It was like a surveillance system of animals, but in the not in the dystopian way, but like rather to see how a landscape intervention is having positive effects. So they were trying to track what kind of animals and stuff were moving through their little intervention. And so when I was listening to yours now, I'm thinking of the potential negative side effects of like big tech companies using smart homes as a kind of veil for surveillance. What do you think the risks are of big tech trying to, gather increasingly more data on us, given the smart home?
Yeah, that talk sounds fascinating. I'm excited to listen to it later. Thanks for bringing up the concept of surveillance. That's something that's really present in the book, but I didn't spend a lot of time on today. I think that the EU is further ahead on some of these questions regarding data privacy protection, the right to be known or not known, to be forgotten. In the US, we're just sort of now grappling with some of the technological questions in the context of the app TikTok, of all things, which is strange to me. But it's important to remember that the smart home as it stands now is a commercial marketing enterprise, and it has to do a lot with data capture. One of the reasons why smart technology is so cheap to the end consumer is that it makes up for its value in other ways. And so we're creating and enmeshing ourselves in a system of smart technologies that we individually may opt into, but we may also not opt into. For instance, there are Ring and other doorbells that are they have cameras in them, and there's a network of them. And until recently, owners of a house that had a Ring surveillance camera could share that with, for instance, police officials. And that made us ask some pretty intense questions about, for instance, warrantless surveillance. Or does it matter whether or not I opt into smart technologies if my neighbors have those doorbells, and anytime I move throughout my neighborhood, there's a record that they and perhaps others have of my movement. And so, yes, I think that in a world of what some scholars have called platform capitalism, data is king. And we have a lot of scholarship on how surveillance disproportionately negatively affects less privileged digital subjects. And I think that that's something we're going to have to continue to wrestle with alongside questions of agency, consent, opting in, opting out, etc.
Hello, this is Ingrid speaking now. I don't know if you can see me. I really enjoyed very much your talk. Thank you very much. And I would like to ask you, in this context of surveillance, and it seems that everything like a dark future, gloomy, with we are also surveyed subjects, but don't you think that maybe there's do you think there's any benefits to this situation of the smart home? For example, what companies claim that we are going to save more energy and make more energy efficient homes. Don't you think that's a very also important subject to take into consideration? How do you see that? Like the benefits that these companies claim for these products?
Absolutely. One of my colleagues, Yolanda Stringers, wrote a book about this smart utopia, this concept, or one of the maybe most promising use cases is in the sustainability space. For me, the question is it a structural alteration of our daily practices that make our engagement with the environment fundamentally different? Or does it help us to just continue on the pathway that we exist now with maybe some small adjustments? So this is where I was going with the efficiency and optimization question. Efficiency and optimization can be good, right? We know that we're more productive now as workers than we've ever been. But given sort of late modern capitalism, at least in the US context, that efficiency has bought us more work rather than necessarily more leisure, more pleasure, more art, more joy, more community. And so I am interested to see how smart products might be part of a sustainable solution, but I would also be concerned with making them the only or like the fundamental part of the solution, because that would not necessarily encourage a more intense re-engagement with sustainability as a practice. It wouldn't necessarily moderate our patterns in a way that's necessary to solve climate issues. I did present a pretty dark view of smart homes today in the context of 20 minutes, but I do spend a lot of time on the experimental smart homes. Let me see if I can get back to, it's gonna kick me out, here we go, to the experimental smart homes here that do some cool work and are also fighting against the dominant paradigms of value and truth that are architected into space. I'll also say, for those of you who are interested, I spend the entire conclusion chapter thinking about how we can re-articulate a smart home to be less of a for-profit commercial endeavor, building a neo-Gilded Age for the most privileged among us, and instead using that technology in a collective way to demonstrate and make possible shared abundance. I think that's possible, but it's going to require not just a re-articulation of the technology, but the frameworks that we use to justify the value of that technology.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring words. And with this, I would like to close your presentation. Thank you, Heather. We have all enjoyed here very much learning from you. And yeah, let's hope for a more inspiring future.